Kumlan of Black Gemara. Today's daf is daf Yutes Amud Aleph. And just a brief note, we mentioned a few days ago about the Evan Ezra that he said that Rome is not Edom, and it's a mistaken notion that many people have. But actually, Mordechai Hashem that Yutes Amud Aleph, we have that they went and they made a protest. This matronissa, this matriarch, advised the Tanoim to go and protest in Rome, so to remove or repeal some of the edicts against the Eden, and they went out and marched at night, and they said, "Our brothers, we are children of the same mother and the same father. Aren't we brothers? Why are you harassing us?" And the when they said we have the same father, same mother, they were referring to Yitzchak and Rivka, which means they were saying clearly that the Romans are from Edom, and therefore leave us alone. So I'm not sure how the Evan Ezra is going to learn Pshat in the Gemara there. Amud Aleph. That's a side note. Today's daf is Yutes Amud Aleph, the Mishnah, Kumlen and Ablat Gemara. Now we're going to talk about the materials that you use for the get, the inks, and the parchment. And I'm not such an expert on these the materials. I'll just able to see that in the Gemara where they are. I'm not exactly sure what they are, but Bakol Kaisin. You can write with any kind of ink, but yoy, you write with an ink called yoy, which we'll see later. It comes from grass. The sam, a kind of a paint. We'll see in the Gemara, and sikra. We'll see what that is. Different kinds of inks, different shades of color, different sources. Over kumus, over kanktum, different kinds of ink. And the Gemara will explain each one they are. Any ink really that is lasting and not temporary, because if it's temporary and it fades, it's no good. Ain kaisin, you should not write with labor mashkin, liquids, but they don't last. For labor made petas, no with fruit juices, for labor choldavish no anything else that does not last. That's the kind of ink, the type of ink you should use. Al hakol kaisin, what about the paper, whatever it is you're using? You can write anything you want. You could even write on the leaf of an olive, but it has to be detached, because we already learned that it has to be v'kosav v'nosav. There should be no middle step in between. So therefore, it's good. It's good on the leaf of an olive. And Taisa says in the Chafal Bays, only the leaf of an olive, because it lasts for a long time. Other leaves fall apart over time. That's no good. It has to be just like the ink you use has to last. So to the parchment or whatever you're going to use to write on. The ala keren shel para, you can write on the horn of a para of an ox. But then you can't break the horn off, because then there's another activity. But noisa lost a para, give the entire para. The reason why we use the example of a para is because by Chanukah the Yevonim wrote on keren shel para that ein lechem chelik b'lekai Yisrael. They wrote on the corners of the para, you have no chelik in the Lekei Yisrael. So we found a precedent where they used to write on the horns. So that's why we use that as an example, to write on the horns of a para. Now, there's a problem we had in Gemara Yeshana about a shofar. The Gemara talks about a shofar. You cannot use a shofar of a para, either because it's not called shofar, it's called keren, or because it's made up of layers, and each layer is like a separate shofar. Shofar achas amar achmana v'lo shofros. So how do you write over here? So there's a big machlekes in the poskim. What are we talking about here? Some say they're layers, but you're writing only on one layer. You're not, writing or straddling 2 or 3 layers, because there'll be a problem. It says sefer echad amar achmana v'lo shnei svarim. Same thing. You can only write on one document, so you're writing on one layer. Or, and this is big enough min halacha. Or the others want to say, since when you're writing it was already attached like one horn, as far as the get is concerned, is all right. And my nafkamina, can you take 2 pieces of parchment, sew them together, and write again on it? If you wrote it on 2 pieces of paper or 2 different pieces of parchment, and then you sew it together, it's a problem. Sefer echad amar achmana. But you already sewed it together before you started writing. Is it treated like one another? So long as I'm saying that, is it treated like one or like 2? And it has to do with a shofar. So depending which answer we gave. If the word is that you only wrote on one of the shofars, on one layer, then even though they're attached right now, it doesn't help us, because the fact is there's 2, it's more than one sefer echad rahmana. But if you say it's considered one piece right now, you can write and straddle as many layers as you want, and you can put together a get as well. Okay, al yad, you can write on the hand of an eved. We'll see later whether you etch it into him. You do ksuvas kaka, you tattoo it into him. The noise is eved, but you have to give the entire eved. You can't, cut it out, because then they're missing activity. Rabbi Yisrael Glila says, I disagree with all that. You cannot write on a living being nor on food. As we'll see the Gemara, few days from now, which pasuk he learns it from. Say for Christ, we'll see. Good, as well. We'll see later. Says the Gemara. Okay, let's go through all of them. Diyai, what's diyai? Diyai is black ink that comes out of a grass. What is sam? Sam is summer. It's kind of a paint. Sikra, what's sikra? Sikra to shema. Sikra is a red kind of an ink. It comes from different kind of grass. Kumus, what's kumus? Kumus is kama, that is the sap of a tree, the gum of a tree. Kankantum, it's a black shoe polish that shoemakers use. Each one's a different material, but they all have longevity. Anything that is, you gave all these examples. What else are you trying to include with any kind of ink that lasts? What do you come into and include? To include, Rab Chanina said, if you wrote it with rainwater, or you wrote it with this gold nut that you soak in water and that turns into if you do it as an ink, the afatzel, that's gold nut itself, kosher, it is kosher. It is kosher. Tani Rabchia said, kosru be'ever, if you wrote using lead, that means that you put the lead in water, and then the water becomes very black, and you use that water to write with. B'shacha, you use the let's say the black from coal, or of a shichur, or you use the black shoe polish from shoemakers. Kosher. All of these instances are kosher. These are more examples that are kosher. That are included when the Mishnah said the whole davar hamiskayim can either include what Rav Chanina says or what Abchia says. Here's what we learned. We learned regarding Hilchos Shabbos. Hamavid diyoi al gabe sikra. Sikra is red, as we said before, but it's not so strong. And diyoi is black ink and much stronger. And if you put the black over the black is far more visible than the red. In fact, you're masking the red; you can no longer see it. So you did that on Shabbos. Now Shabbos, you're not allowed to write two letters. That when you write ksiva, it has to be words, and the minimum word is two letters. So you're not allowed to write two letters. And if you intended to write four letters, you wrote two letters. Two letters make it like Shimon, and you wrote Shimem, which is a word, is also maybe also. So what happened was you had two letters there, and on Shabbos you just fill in, or you write over it, but you're using a different ink, you're using black over red, which is much more prominent. You take this black ink and you write over this red on Shabbos. Rabbi Yechon and Shlakish, both Rabbi Yechon and Shlakish, the Amrit Tavayu, they both say Chayiv Shtayim. On Shabbos we have 39 malachas. There's one malacha. Generally, all malachas have to be constructive. Malachas machshavos. But you have a malacha, for example, which is called soiser, demolishing. What's constructive about that? Why would you be chayiv? So you're right. You're only chayiv soiser if soiser amanas livnis. If you're destroying in order to rebuild. Machlekes Rashi takes it that the new building has to be better than before or equal, but it has to be in a constructive way. Otherwise, it's mahatayda. You're potter. And the same thing applies to mekalkal. You're ruining something. If you're erasing. If you're erasing, you're not chayiv on Shabbos because you're destroying, unless you're erasing in order to rewrite. And the only way you can rewrite it is by erasing it first. So therefore, that's called a constructive way. So what happens on Shabbos? There were two letters already existing, but in red ink, and you wrote on top of that in black ink. So what you did was two malachas. You erased the red, and now you masked the red, and now you can see the black is visible. Are you able or not? If you didn't write anything new, you just wrote on top of the other ones. So we're saying over here, they both say chayiv shtayim, you're liable for two avedas. Achas mishum kaiser. One is that you wrote it in black now, and achas mishum moichik. You erased in order to be able to write those two same letters in black, and then you're chayiv. What about diyah gabadiyah? The same ink was already there, written in one in a certain diyah, and you rewrote on top of that with diyah again. Or sikla gabadiyah, red on top of red. Potter, you are potter. Why? Because what did you add? And you didn't erase anything. You didn't really add anything new. Nothing was added. So therefore you are potter. Sikra al gabadiga. What the other way around? You did red on top of black. If you did red on top of black, the black is still very visible because the black is stronger than the red. However, you did make it fade somewhat, and you wrote red above it. Others, some say chayiv, you are chayiv, and the amrullah, others say potter. What's the machlekes? Amrullah, some say chayiv. Why you chayiv? Because meichakum. No, you're not going to hold you responsible for writing because you didn't add anything. We have those same two letters, and the letters still there. But the thing is, you did make it fade a little bit. And the machlekes is when we say mekalkul, does it have to be total destruction, or even like a partial destruction? Is that considered mekalkul? So opinion number one says, even though you can still see the red, it's a partial destruction and a partial. What do you call it? It's, some say could they say that it's not called mekalkul at all, but it's a mekalkul only if you destroy it completely. And therefore you are chayiv. Sorry, you're chayiv meichik even if you partially erase it, you don't erase it completely. And amla potter because they say it's not considered erasing unless you completely erase it. I can still see it, even though it faded a bit. That's not called erasing. What did you erase? Sorry, that's not a makal. Machlek is how do we understand erasing when we say that erasing is also has to be completely erased or even partially erased. Also, that's the machlek. Now. Okay, that's to do with Shabbos. Now, why are we discussing here? Because now we're going to discuss by get what happens. So, you have two witnesses we had before already who don't know how to sign. They don't know how to sign anything. So, is it allowed for the Yanim to write their names in red, and the and they should come and sign in black? Since regarding Shabbos, we consider it that you erased the original, and it's a new word. Same over here, we can say as if you erased the original simmer, and the Adim have signed the name. Good enough. Ksav ain't ksav. Amalei Rebbe said, when it comes to get, ain't ksav. Amalei Rebbe said, you told us ksav el ksav in Shabbos. Interesting. Reish Lakish here is saying that Rebbe you paskin, and before we said that Rebbe and Reish Lakish both say. I mean, the Shlokish was so bottled to his Rebbe. Whatever his Rebbe said, he agreed with, unless he clearly argues. But otherwise, we had quite a few machlekes between the two. But otherwise, he agreed with his Rebbe. So it's like if they're both saying it together. Amar Rabbi Yechonah said, because I said in logic that this is the law by Shabbos. You think we can go ahead and compare Gittin to Shabbos? Just because Shabbos, that's the law. Who said that's the law by Gittin? Now, in fact, it's a big machlekes Rashi and Rambam. What exactly is Rabbi Yechonah saying? The Rambam knows Rabbi Yechonah saying is by Shabbos. Yes, you're right. You committed two malachas. You did mechika. You erased. You did ksiva. You're writing. You have to bring two korban chatois. No question. But you now want to assimilate between Shabbos and Gittin. We can't, because logically you're right, but we cannot go ahead and make life difficult for a woman and say that she's a good or say it is good or not good about a good, but to make laws in Gittin because we compare to Shabbos. You can't just compare one to another. That's Rambam. Rashi, however, learns, he's saying, let's go back to Shabbos. Just because in Shabbos I said logically you should be able to evade it. You think if I would live the time of base of English and this is what happened, you think I would force the person to go ahead and bring two kabbanis? Maybe it's chulin bazara, maybe I'm wrong. You cannot make halachas based on logic. So Rashi holds that even in Hilchos Shabbos, we would not charge the person with two malachas. So interesting machlek is Rashi and the Rambam. I mean, according to the Rambam, you can make halachas based on logic, and according to Rashi, you can't. Itmar, now that we brought, but you bring up where Shabbos, not nowadays, yes, but not them kabbanis. Yeah, okay, yeah. Well, definitely it's also with the rabbanos. We're talking about trading. Itmar. So now that we introduced the idea of ain't no not a sign, we already had it before. Itmar, let me ask you a question.
Sorry, can I just ask? So we've got all these laws about Gzeira Shava and so on. So according to Rambam, that's maybe not so important.
No. Those 13 rules, the Gzeira Shava and Klal Prat and Klal, these are tools that were given to us from Har Sinai. So all of those are mehat Torah. But we're talking now about that you wrote on top of something else. There's no basis for it, but we're saying it makes sense because you covered the bottom one and you wrote a new one. And logic, you can always argue the other way around. You didn't create anything new. I could have read that word before. And what did you create over here? You didn't really create anything. But logic says yes, because before it was red, now it's black, so it's Yechayiv. We have a concept in the Gemara. The Gemara says, we have it many times. The Gemara says, Svorihi, that it's a logic, but the Torah is nevertheless, Milsa the Asibakawa Chaimer, Torach v'Kosel Lakros. Things which you can use logic, the Torah still decided to write it down. So so sometimes logic would have been good enough, but the Torah just decided to write it down. Sometimes logic is not good enough. I guess it depends how compelling, how cogent the logic is. But Rashi clearly learns right here that in Hilchos Shabbos I would never have made him a carbon because I'm not so convinced that I'm 100% right. Mm-hmm. So getting back to Eidim who don't know how to sign. So the word says Itma, we learned Eidim came back to Eidim who don't sign. What do you do? We had it before. Rav says Mekarin lehem niyar chalak. You take sort of a blank piece of paper and umemalim esakroyim diyoy. What you do is you etch into the blank piece of paper the names of these witnesses, and then the witnesses go ahead and they pour ink into it. That's how Rashi lives. Tosfos before completely argues with this, and Tosfos says that how could Tosfos says, and that's completely. It's like the first aid, whoever they were, already signed. The second name not really adding anything. So therefore, Tosfos learns, Yerushalmi learns that they had another sheet of paper where they made the holes, like you have this alphabet, right. They carved out the letters in that other sheet of paper, and then they covered over the, let's say whatever the parchment they use for the get, and then they fill in the ink. But then Yerushalmi says, again, they didn't really do anything because you already have the outline of the letters. Yerushalmi says that they have to make sure they don't fill the entire outline. They leave a little gaps between, the ink that went in there and the outline of the letters. So the Eidim therefore have their own signature, sort of. Following that logic, you say Rashi. When Rashi says that they carved in there, and the agent filled them with ink, maybe the same thing, that they didn't fill it in entirely. I'm not sure if you can control it because ink is liquidy. Once it goes in, how do you control that it doesn't fill the entire space? I don't know how they do that. Yeah, sorry.
It's a funny discussion because the dust of the people is simply to help to prepare for those who are signing. So then etching and this and that, but they don't have
the problem with the get is, a normal star wouldn't do this. The problem with the get is the husband might be departing tomorrow overseas, and we need to make sure there's a get. Or the husband right now finally agrees, the recalcitrant husband, to give a get to his wife. We don't want to give any delays. Let's just do it. The only two people that we can find in the neighborhood are two people who are ignorant. Says they don't know how to sign their names. I mean, we today can't imagine they don't know how to sign the names. They just don't know how to sign their names. So we need to find a ruse somehow to make it kosher. So that's what Rav said. Shmuel says be'aver. Shmuel says use lead. Use lead. Says the Gemara. It said do you use aver? Says the Gemara. Be'aver salkadatach. You're going to use lead. Abchia said. No, what he's saying was the first, you get two agents to come over inside. You get the dayanim to write out the names in lead. It's not a kosher signature. And then you get the proper agent to come along and write over that. In other words, use the first level, the first signature will not be a kosher signature. So use a material that's not kosher, like lead. And then get the agent to write over that. That's better, easier. Says the Gemara. You're talking about lead. What turned it up here? We said before. What's our Mishnah including when it says you can use any kind of ink that's lasting? He said, if you wrote with lead, or you wrote with, with the coal, or you wrote with the black polish for shoes, it's kosher. No, lead is kosher. So the first signature is already kosher. Like kosher depends. When do we say it's kosher? When you take the lead, you put it in water, and then the black, the water itself becomes black. That's ink, and that's kosher. He's talking about just using lead itself. Lead is not an ink; it will eventually blow away or something. But originally, you put in lead, and then they write over that. The main milim. Abavu says let the dayanim, for example, write using main milim, and then that is water that the golnuts. Them sit in there and it soaks there, and then the water itself becomes like an ink. Says the Gemara, and that's not kosher signature. And then let the proper agent write over that. So what do we mean? It's not kosher signature. Chanina said kosher metari about kosher. Like kasha, it's not a kasha. The office, depending on the parchment you're writing on. If the part needs to have the parchment, you have to work out the parchment as well. You have to go in like a tavis. They sit there and they work out the parchment. If he used afitz, if he used gold nuts on the parchment itself, then you cannot write using the same kind of material on it. It'll fade very quickly. You won't see it. So then you get the dayanim to write with mei afotzim, and because it's not a permanent ink, because the parchment itself has it already, you can hardly see it. And then the proper agent will write over that. Hard to lie off it, but if the parchment was made with and without using mei afotzim, then using that kind of ink would last. And the original dayanim could not use mei afotzim in that instance. You cannot use the same. You cannot use the ink, the same material as what you're using for the parchment. The parchment. Our Papa says, the best thing is baraik. Let the original dayanim spit and use the spit with the finger, write the names, and then the Papa Torah. That Papa won't say the Papa will work with the oxen, but you spit, and then the real agent will just write over and spit. How do you even Gittin? When you make this allowance, only when it comes to Gittin, because we want to make sure that she receives her gift. Any other star, make sure you find Adim who know how to sign their own names. Because by Gittin, the guy will die, the guy will leave, and she will be stuck in a goodness. So Gemara says, in fact, there was an incident. Somebody actually used for others to this method, let's say saliva, the Nogdei Rav Kana gave him Schmitz, Rav Kana gave Malchus for starting a new pattern over here. And he gave Malchus not to the person who passed him that's all right. That's what it seemed. Not to the Eidim who signed, because Nogdei is like Rosh Yachid, so I guess the person who organized. Says the Gemara, Tanya Kavod said that we look like that you just etch in the parchment like Rashi learned. You're ripping you etch into the paper, which is blank. You fill up all the etchings with ink. We had this before. Reb Shimon said, when do we tolerate this? When it comes to Gittin of women. When it comes to setting free your Eved, and we're not worried about a Gunade or any other contract. If they know Likres, and he throws in this reading when we had it before, and Lachem sign, Chaismin, they let them sign. But otherwise, we don't let them sign. So you want a reading? Who mentioned reading? Kriya Mandekar Shmei. Where does reading come in? The Tanakh didn't mention a word about whether they know how to read or they don't know how to read. He just said that they about signing. So you're right. Chsudi Mechs, a few words are missing. This is how you should read the Braisa. Eidim she'ein eidim likrais. This is how you start off. Eidim that don't know how to read. Koilin lifneim, you read before them. The chaismin, and then let them the sign say eidim lachtim. If they don't know, if the sign, if they don't understand, you do this in this method. So Tanakh says you read before them. They have to know what's there. When do we allow reading that they don't know how to read? Only by Gittin Nashim. All other contracts, good, they know how to read and sign, but not a sign. Yeah, so that going to Tanakh, it seems there's no difference between get and all other status. If they don't know how to read before them, they don't know how to sign, do this method. And the Shimon says, no, this is only tolerated by Gittin and not by all other cases. And yet Rav Kahana gave Malchus to somebody who followed the Tanakh. Why was he more lenient by Gittin than all other contracts? We don't want them to remain agunas. Amarav halacha k'Shimon Gamliel. Came along Rav and said the halacha is like Shimon Gamliel, but Rav Gamda mashmei the Rav ain't halacha. But Rav Gamda said name of Rav, it's not the halacha. Says you might understand. So what do you say the halacha Rabbanan? Which means that any contract, if you don't have a sign, will use the same method. We just learned there was a person who used that method in all other contracts. But no, did have kind of gave him Malchus. The Gemara could have answered. You're asking a kasha from one Amoira to another Amoira. Rav Kahana paskin like the Tanakh, and Rav Kahana paskin like Rav Shimon Gamliel. Only Gittin we allow. There's no other contracts. And Rav Gamda in the name of Rav paskin like Rav Shimon Gamliel.
You're saying Rav Shimon Gamliel.
Yeah.
How does someone put Rav to say that's not?
No. We have it a few times. Gamda said, I heard from Rabbi. Now, with Rabbi, it actually more plausible than anybody else, because we had it in every other places that Rabbi one day would say halacha, and then a couple of days later would come back and say, what I said then was no good. And if Rav Gamda was there the first year, and not the later shir. This is what he heard. Rav Kahana, we had a few Rav Kahana. We had Rav Kahana who had discussion with Rav Ashi. This is Rav Kahana who was a student of Rav. We're going to learn at the very end of Baba Kama, who's an amazing Amoida. Rav Yechon was scared of him. When he came to Yisrael, he had to run away because he killed somebody. And he had to run away. Rav Yechon fretted. This is Rav Kahana because he had a smirk on his face, and Rav Yechon had him killed. A whole story, fascinating story. We'll learn. So Rav Kahana said something. It's not Stam an Amoida. It's Rav Kahana. How could Rav Gamda argue? So we answer Targuma Akriya. Over there is talking about reading, that that if they know how to sign, if they Gamda was saying that the halacha is not a when do we pass collection Shungam so now we can resolve this. When do we pass collection Shungam when it comes to Chasima? When it comes to Chasima, that if they don't know how to sign, we'll do this method that's only limited to Gittin and not all other things. But when it comes to Kriya, when it comes to reading, then we don't follow Rav Shimon Gamliel, and you can do it in all status. Maybe. Yeah. So now, interesting. The Gemara says that the halach is whatever it says Rav Shimon Gamliel, the halach is always like him except in 3 places. And yet over here we have to say halach Rav Shimon Gamliel, and we have somebody who says halach is not like him. So they bring it right from here that when it comes to brises, and Rav Shimon argues that rule doesn't apply, even though the Shachar Shmuel says it does. There's a big argument on that. Says the Gemara, Rav Yehuda would force himself. He could hardly read, but he would force himself that before he signed the thing, he would read it personally. Even though we just said you don't really have to read status, the Chasima is very important, but reading is not important. And why? Because other people can read it before you. Like we'll see later, people that you trust can read it, say what it says. But Rabbi Yehuda, whose eyes were fading, nevertheless, if he ever had to sign, he would make sure that he personally read it, and then he would sign. Ula said to him, you don't have to. The Rabbi Lazar, Morad Yisrael. Rabbi Lazar was known as the master of Yisrael. He was a bucky in Maris for a nida. He knew better than anybody else. He's called the master of Eretz Yisrael. And yet people would read before him. He also, I guess, when he was old, he couldn't read. He didn't have reading glasses in those days, so somebody would read the get before him, or the star, and then he would sign. So you don't have to bother yourself to read yourself. But Rab Nachman, Rab Nachman would have reading for him, not stam people, only other the scribe that his bezin commissioned that he trusted. The Dafke Rab Nachman, Safra Dayana, Dafke Rab Nachman, and Safra Dayana, the East Emerson, he trusted them because they were intimidated by him. First of all, he was the Av Bezin, and more than that, he was a son-in-law of the Reish Galusa. Reish Galusa, they had a lot of authority. They had big among Sanhedrin. Reish Galusa was more powerful in Babel than the Seaman at Yisrael. He had the stick. He had a lot of authority. And Rab Nachman, even other Seifrim, if they weren't part of his bezin, or Safra Dayan or Safra Dayanim, but other people, like he would not trust them. So in other words, even though other could read, he would wait to see that somebody that he could trust.
Differentiate and say because they can actually read, because it says in Yodim, these people know how to read.
No,
So
the truth, if a guy is half blind, why did he read himself? Because he couldn't see. That considered knowing how to read. It doesn't matter why you don't know how to read, whether because
the person translated.
Maybe that's how Yehuda's trust. Very good. Maybe Yehuda's felt says he could. You shouldn't rely on anybody. These others couldn't read. Says the Gemara. Papa gave us a kame before came Ashtada Parsa. We already had before a Persian star, which is kosher only the Ovid and Koyesh Kusim made in the court of Kusim, and they were signed by Goyim. And we said before it's kosher if it's done in a court. Mikra Lushne Kusim. That's what he would do, and he couldn't read the language because it was Persian. What he did was he would call in 2 Kusim, but not at the same time. Call each separately, independent of each other. Masiach lefitum, without making them aware that he's asking them because he wants to know whether he could sign or not. He'd just say, "Hey, can you tell me I just got this contract? This. What does it say here?" We'd have them both read, and if it's identical, then he knows that's exactly what it said. And the Magbi Mishabadi, then he gave it the full power of a star instrument that you can collect from even purchased properties. And when we learned before that you can only collect from Bnei Chari, and that was talking about if it was made outside of a Goyish court. But made in Goyish court has the full strength of a financial instrument. Once said, Hi, Stora Parsa. This Persian star, the Chasim al Yisrael, the two Jews signed on it, Magbinan Bey Mishabadi. We can now use that to collect from Shabadi because he too in sign. They don't understand what they wrote. What did they sign? They don't understand Persian. But the other, talking about two Eden, don't understand Persian. But being exception, Yochel is they're not so particular what kind of ink they use. And now Mishnah says they need to use an ink that is everlasting. No, they use an ink that does last. Gold, the gold nuts in this water. But we have a certain format, a template. And our template, the very end is a summary, so we don't want people to add a few more lines between the end, the end of the star and before the Adam sandwich some words, the Adam signatures. And you give a complete summary. But you did do that. No, you followed everything correctly. What's the chiddush? The chiddush is the whole lashon kosher. Is that the chiddush that every lashon is kosher? Which more last minute we know that. In other words, what's the chiddush of lashon kosher? If you're living in an English speaking country, of course, in English. We're talking about you're living in an English speaking country, but you're writing in another language, not English, a foreign language. It's also kosher. So what's the chiddush? Tanina. We learned that as well. We learned get shekosher ivrit, a get that was written in ivrit, and the Adam Yavanis, and Adam write in Greek, or Yavanis, the get was written in Greek. Clearly, you can write in other languages. The Adam Ivrit and the Adam are writing in ivrit. Kosher is kosher. So it's clear you can write. We know already you can write any language that you want. What are you telling us that we didn't know? Says the Gemara. I would have thought how to make a Gittin. I would have thought it's limited on the Gittin because the case is talking about a get. Okay, by get again, remember always a guna. We're trying to make things as easy as possible. That's the only language they know. Let's get overdone with. I will be all the contracts. Wait till you find people who can that the Adim and the people all the same language has to be the main language, the main tongue of that country. Loy, but other languages no. Kamashlan, you can write any language as long as the Adim understand what it says, and it's good enough.
Get in English?
No, not at all. We're talking about all contracts here. Anyway, today you go to a sefer. Because it has to be Lishma and Sefer. And once you go to Sefer, the Sefer, part of the training is. And today we have a format, exactly these words. We'll see later. Actually, we had it in the Durham, in the beginning there. But you give Yadayim Mechichas, Yadayim Shem Mechichas, little languages. How specific do you have to be? Amar Shmuel says Shmuel. In fact, even though we'll talk about it later. Amar Shmuel says, No Shmuel said, if you gave her a blank, interesting thing, you gave her a blank piece of paper, like invisible ink. But Amala, you said, on this paper, you should know that your get is written there. Migureshes, she's divorced. Why? Something written, it's blank. We say that since he said it's a divorce, we say that Shema b'mei milin kosu. Maybe he uses this golden thing that's like invisible ink, and it'll come back later. It's there. It is definitely there. So the Gemara makes us a question. What happens? He says to her, the following the get, and she's very angry. When I told her, she took the get, it was a rakteliyam, tossed it into the sea, or the wood into a fire, or the whole dover, or anything that's gone. There's no longer a get. The chazavam, and then the husband turned around. Oh, here's an opportunity. Star passing move. Yeah, I was mocking you. It's not really a get. No, it was a start passing, an appeasement start. Sometimes people want to go out and get loans, and nobody trusts you that you'll pay them back. So you want to show them that you're very wealthy. So either you drive a Mercedes, but you can't afford that either. So what do? You go to a friend of yours, do me a favor. Write that you owe me $1,000. Of course, I'll never collect. You make another hidden agreement that I don't owe you. So I can go show people, look, I'm in position to lend $1,000 to people, then you know that I'm good for my money. Let's go start passing. Or a borrower says to the lender, I'll need money one day, not today, but have a contract ready that you're going to lend me $1,000, and I trust you. You're not going to go to a court and say that you lend me the money and collect until we activate the star. It's called star money, star based on faith. We have this in Ksubis. Is Muguresha, she's divorced. In this case, we don't believe the husband. We think he's changing his mind. Since initially he said to her, this is a divorce, and he gave her the words on there, we just never saw it. And she threw in the water. Like him, he's not believing him to say, you're not divorced. Seems to me a time when we saw there was writing on it. That's why we say definitely divorce. But in the case, in our case, where it was a blank piece of paper. And then he said there was not a divorce. It seems that Mitaka would believe him. Says no. Kika Amar Shmuel. Shmuel's talking about the case over here, the Bat Kinele B'Maya. When he says here that it was divorced, is talking about that we actually checked it out, and there was, and we checked it out with Maya Denora. We checked it out with some kind of a dye that when you put the dye over this, suddenly the letters are visible. It's like that was a blue light you put over, and suddenly you can see letters. If the words come out, then it's good, even though you can't see it stam unless you put that dye on top of it. But if it doesn't come to the fore, then it's like you didn't write it. So think about the mahave, even what do you call it? It's all after he put the dye, the words come out. But after the polish, it's now the words came out. But when he gave it to her, there's nothing there. So Gemara says, you're right. Shmuel nami chayshika. It doesn't say it's a get. It's saying maybe. Maybe if you looked at it closely, you could have already seen an outline of words before you put the dye on it. You're right. If he gave her a blank piece of paper and true, you can bring the words out, that wouldn't have been a get. But maybe it was a bit visible. Yeah.
Who would sign on such a thing?
This guy obviously doesn't like his wife, and he really wants to make her life as difficult as possible, put it through a tortuous path, and he's just throwing as many spanners at the work as possible. And so that when she goes around showing a blank piece of paper, you laugh at this, I get, and then she'd have to go find this dye and so on. Unfortunately, that's what happens sometimes. Anyway, talking about it further, but we see clearly from here that that this they don't put the dye test till after received it, which shows that they don't really have to read it until after. You don't have to read it before they give the get. They can read it after they give the get to the woman and read it then. It's good enough. Anyway, takes us a long discussion what you have to read. Talking about it further. These two people, if they were a get was given, let's say Edom Asira, they were given a get. They need to read the get. But when do they need to read it? Before he gives it to her, or even after she receives it? That's what Taisus has a discussion there. And Taisus brings at the end that the Re had a custom. He would get them to read it twice. To read it once before they gave it to her, and once after they gave it to her, just to make sure that it's the same document. As a seen him anymore. Makes ask the question, how is a get that he gave her a get and told her when she threw in tossed in the seal or in the fire, then he changed the story. And he's not believed to ask what's going on here. If they read it before they gave it to her and then he gave it to her, it's preposterous. Why would you even think that you believe the husband? He comes along, they saw it. It says clearly it's a get. How do you have to tell them?
Maybe they don't understand what they're reading.
We're talking about here that you have to, then someone else has to read through them. But if you tell me that they have to read, that's what you're saying. I have to read. What do you have to tell me that? No, of course you can't come along and concoct the story that this wasn't really a proper get. What happened was, after they read it, he put it in his bosom pocket, and maybe he's a magician, he pulled out something else. And he then pulled it out. Maybe he had this whole scheme there in place. He had another piece of paper there, and then they read this, he put it in his pocket, and pulled it out, something else. That we don't believe him. Who Gavra talking about whether believing in the exchange? The person is on the Gittin through or gets his wife. And it landed between a bunch of barrels of wine. They went searching for it and they found a mezuzah lying there. The question is, he said this is a get. And now they found the mezuzah. Do we say that what he threw is actually a mezuzah, he was mocking her, or there's something else? Why would you find a mezuzah lying on the floor between two barrels? So therefore, we're going to assume that that's what he threw, and therefore she's not divorced. But Hani, immediately when do we say that? You found one mezuzah lying there. Gimel, if he found two or three mezuzahs lying there, he definitely only threw one piece of paper. If he found two or three mezuzahs lying there, obviously they were there for whatever reason from before, and maybe his get was still out there, so she's a suffering relation. Since we found one, there were two or three other mezuzahs, maybe this one also was there from before. The get maybe mice took it away, so it's a suffix megurashes, which means that she has to receive another get, and if he dies now, she cannot. Even though she's free, she cannot marry a kohen because maybe she's divorced already because it's in her property. So when she was her property, she was divorced. Maybe he did throw a get. The person, the person went to shul, shakal sefer Torah. He took a sefer Torah, and in the Torah it says the kosel sefer krisis the nosala. And Yavla Bisi took the entire sefer Torah. Remember, we had by a sefer that you can use a sefer Torah. So he took the entire sefer Torah, and Yavla Bisi gave it to his wife. He said to her, "Here is your get." Omar Rabbi Yehuda said, "Why would you even think for a minute, contemplate it's the proper get? If you tell me that what? Because it's written there with a permanent kind of an ink. Let's say you use that main milin, a main milin, remember that the parchment itself, they use main milin to fan it and everything else. So therefore, you can't write. It's not. It fades over time. It's not long term. The image from krisis, the isba. Because the Torah it says the sefer krisis. Habin because Allah, the shema, it has to be done in her name. The lekha, you don't have that. Maybe he decided it's cheaper. How why? A sefer was writing a sefer Torah. Do me a favor. I'll pay you the $50,000. Have my wife in mind, but you're right. Come to this pasuk. I think Brian's friend is a lot smarter than this. A lot cheaper. But he had a friend who he will forget in case. So the Gemara Habin, but we need Shmai. The word Shina means changing, but we need Shmai. The most Gesai is Habin and Shmai v'Shma. You need in the get inserted her name, his name, Shemira, city, Shemira, and her city, Beleka. And you don't have that. Interesting. The Gemara doesn't say you need the date. But that's what we do Rabbanon. It's named Articulus Man Begittin. We're talking about you need Shmai v'Shma. Other Rishonim, the Mordechai brings you some Rishonim that you don't need a get. If you have a get without names, it's still good enough because we know who you're giving to because it's right here in front of us. And the Gemara here it says being a Shina Shmai v'Shma, that the dilemma of changing the names. So that means that you have to make sure that the names are at least not wrong. But Rabbi Yosef, so therefore it's no good. Rabbi Yosef, my kamashma, what's he actually coming to teach us here? You cannot write this din that you cannot use ink meimilin on top of other meimilin. That's what he's coming to teach us, because the part itself is meimilin. Says the Gemara. Amar Rav Chizda. So takes as a whole debate as well. If you don't have the names, Mahatayda is still kosher to get or not. Amar Rav Chizda said, "Get your kosher shaloi lishma." What happened to get? What happened? We said before that if you rewrite the same letters over and above, on Shabbos you're not over. By Gittin, it's not considered like you're signing. But what happens the first time you wrote a word in the get? It was not written lishma. So you rewrite it, but this time lishma. So it's a spiritual kind of an achievement here of something new. Is that considered a new writing or not? The heavy of kumas lishma. So let's say you wrote the get not having this woman in mind, then you rewrote the entire get, you wrote above those letters, the same thing again, but now you had her in mind. What's it? Says Gemara, Rav Chizda wants to say that this is the same machlekes as Rabbi Yehuda Rabban. What's that? When you write the Eibish's name in the Sefer Torah, you have to have in mind the Eibish's name. The time you learn, you had to write the Eibish's name, and when it's Yehuda, by mistake you thought you can write Yehuda, but then I made another mistake. The Torah, by Dalet, you forgot to write the Dalet. You made two mistakes, which turned out to be the right thing. Double negative became a positive. So you Taka wrote Hashem's name, but your intention was to write Yehuda, and really, what should the word have been? Hashem, and but you missed the Dalet, it became Hashem. So what do you do? How do you fix it up? Is Mavid Olav Kumusum Mekache. You go ahead and write again above it, and you Mekadosh. Divid Rabbi Yehuda, and we have to write an order over here. There's not a problem by writing an order, as the function talking about. The Chachamim say, "Ein Hashem min amuchim." This is not an ideal situation. It's not an ideal situation. In other words, it's not good. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's considered valid writing. If you write, the first time you wrote to get not having her in mind, now you rewrote it. And according to the Chachamim, it's a valid writing. Sorry, it's the other way around. According to it's a valid writing. According to Chachamim, it's not a valid writing. Sorry. Okay. Amar Rab Achava Yaakov, you cannot draw a similarity between the laws of writing a Sefer Torah and Rishma to writing it. And why is that? Dil Malahi, maybe it's not so. Ad can like come upon Hassan. You know what I want to argue? Look at the wording they use. Ein Hashem min hamuvch. It's not ideal. They don't say it's possible. It's not ideal. Why? Because when it comes to a mitzvah, the beina zeh keli, especially Sefer Torah, we need zeh keli v'adeyu. When you do a mitzvah, you have to do it the nicest possible way. So therefore, when you write Hashem's name, you should have in mind Hashem's name, not to have in mind Yehuda. By mistake, you ended up with Hashem's name. And therefore they say to rewrite it, that's not good enough. It has to be done in a proper way. Like when stated that they even should show off the beautiful sefer Torah they had and the writing and the parchment and everything else. But when it comes to a get, when it comes to a get, since we don't have this union of Zekel, even though it's a mitzvah, everything's a mitzvah, but we don't have this the writing of the get, wording of the get itself is not the mitzvah, all the one that we use. And the main purpose of the get is that she should be divorced. So therefore over here, maybe the Rabbanan Maida that you could write on top of the other get and it will salvage it. Amr Chizah said, we'll just finish the 2 dots. Chizah said, I can, if I want, to passel all the divorces in the world. I'm not sure what the point of that is, but that's what he said. Amr over my time, on what basis? If it costs that the husband should write it. But the Chachamei Takana, to make sure that the husband says, I can't afford to get, and therefore she'll be stuck. So the Chachamei, you know what? You pay the sefer. You tell the woman, you pay the sefer, and this way the get will happen. And say that he shouldn't use any excuse, no pretext why he can't give you a get. Right? We have to remove all of them. Is that the basis for Rav Chizah saying that all the Gittin apostle today? But maybe the Rabban part that's kind of was that she gives the money, but the money we make have to give it to him. In fact, it's interesting. We have a big machlekes that are showing him in Gittin, actually in Gittin Shalech, when we say Hefker Bezin Hefker, but we'll talk about it there. When we say that 2 psukim we bring, why we bring 2 psukim for the basis that Bezin can make Hefker is, how far can Bezin make Hefker? The Bezin only have the capacity to take your money and say, no, you're no longer the owner of that money, it's no longer yours, it's Hefker. Or Bezin has the capacity to go 2 steps, take it away from you and transfer to somebody else. Over here, we're saying clearly, look at Rashi says clearly, Rashi over here, we're taking away from the woman the money, as the Gemara says, and we're giving it to him. As Rashi, we take that money away from her, and it's as if command Ihu, as if he gave it. We're doing both steps, and maybe that's exactly the machlekes of Chizah and Rava. Rav Chizah says that we cannot do both steps. That we could take the money away from the wife, but we cannot give it to the husband. And the husband is trying to find excuses why he doesn't want to, why he cannot hire the sefer. He says, I don't want to take money from Hefker, I don't want my tonnes, whatever it is. I don't want it. You want me to be kind? I don't want to be kind. So he says, I can pass all the Gittin. But Rava says, no. I hold that the Bezin has the capacity, Hefker, to make it his. And he can't avoid that. And therefore, it's a kosher to get. And I have no problem with that. And that's maybe Chizah Rava. Then the Gemara continues. The element should see it says the pasuk the Nosan that he should give. The Nosan generally means a dover choshev. But Hachal Yom doesn't give her anything, right? Doesn't give her anything. So Gemara says Dilma the sinus ageti. Who said it doesn't give her anything? Maybe the word Nosan here doesn't mean choshev. Nosan means you got to give something into her hand. And Teda prove it to you with Nosan does not mean you have to give choshev. Because the sholchem etam kosu al asuri hana kosher. You can write on the asuri hana, and it is kosher. And so what do you mean? Even though it has no value, it's Yisriyana, and yet it is kosher. So what does that prove? I said Nasan, that in this case, sometimes Nasan means it has to be a double kosher. We say when you steal truma, you have to give back to the kohen a double kosher. But sometimes, like chita achas patel zakri, by truma says Nasan, yet even one little kernel of wheat is enough. So the here Nasan doesn't mean it has to be kosher, but Nasan means even something Yisriyana. Hence, he can write on all these other things. It doesn't matter. It's still a value. He's fulfilling the mission of sin. So Rava says, I'm talking about all Gittin are 100% kosher. And so it could possibly maybe based on what we said before. Okay, we'll stop here.